Tonight, on Closer Look, dubbed the king of renovictions in Ontario, Michael Klein is back in the news following a protest by a group of tenants outside of a Forest Hill residence owned by Klein. Toronto Today reporter Gabe Oatley is here with the latest and joins us tonight from Toronto. Gabe, I know you were able to have a chat with Michael Klein recently, and we'll get to that conversation in a moment. But let's start with the protest. Who was there and what was the purpose?
Yeah, so this was one evening earlier in December, about mid-December. About 40 tenants and their allies from across Ontario descended on one of Toronto's most upscale neighborhoods, Forest Hill. These are folks who live in modest, affordable rental properties across Ontario that are affiliated with businessman Michael Klein. He's an officer director of the company. The purpose of the protest was to effectively have these tenants confront Klein. They are all facing so-called renovictions at Klein-affiliated properties across the province. They said at the demonstration that they have tried to reach Klein in a number of different ways, through property managers, through calling Klein-affiliated buildings that own these rental apartments where they live, and they said they've had no luck reaching him. And so given their challenges, they wanted to bring the protest to Klein's doorstep. So they were actually in front of a Forest Hill home. Later, in the conversation I had with Klein, we learned that he does not live there himself. It's a property he owns, but one of his relatives live there. But effectively, their effort was to try and talk to Michael Klein and just tell him, hey, we are not happy with how you are running the properties that you own, and we're not going anywhere. We don't want to leave our properties.
All right, let's talk about Acorn for a sec. They're a tenant advocacy group that published a recent report that links Klein to 21 properties province-wide and alleged that he is the province's biggest renovictor. What do protesters say that Klein is doing exactly?
Yeah, so protesters in Acorn effectively say that Klein, this Toronto businessman, is affiliated with all of these different companies. He's either an officer or a director of the companies, and he says that the companies that own these buildings are using a similar playbook to effectively push out long-term tenants that are paying a reasonable amount in rent in order to get in new tenants who will pay higher rent. Advocates say this really isn't just a Toronto thing, so there are certainly buildings in Toronto that Klein owns where folks say renovictions are occurring, but advocates also say this is happening Ontario-wide, that there are over 680 units across 7 Ontario cities, including Cambridge, London, Kitchener, Hamilton, where tenants are facing the prospect of renovictions at Klein-affiliated buildings. So they say there is, this really sort of systematic playbook that Klein-affiliated companies are using. They say, first of all, the company focuses on units where residents have been living in their units the longest and are thus paying the lowest rent. He said, or advocates say that the landlord will deliver tenants a letter. This letter says that the landlord is ending their tenancy to complete renovations. Sometimes the letter will then be followed by a so-called N13 form. This is all like technical stuff, but they'll get like an N13 in their mailbox or slipped under their door. This is the form that the landlord has to submit to the landlord-tenant board, asking for permission to temporarily evict the tenant to complete major renovations. Advocates say that tenants will often in these buildings, in their letter, be told that the landlord is willing to offer them somewhere between $3,000 or $6,000 if they're willing to move out of their unit sort of right away and have their tenancy be ended. But advocates also say that if tenants refuse to leave, that the Klein-affiliated sort of property managers will make it really tough for them to live there, effectively by not doing a good job with maintenance, making it tough for folks to want to continue on with their tenancy.
Okay, so one of those tenants, Gabe, that you spoke with, Billy Thornhill, he's lived in his Klein-owned apartment for more than 20 years. and he had some harsh words for Klein. What were they?
Yeah, so Billy was there in mid-December, in front of this property that Klein owns. He was wearing an elf hat. He was wearing a sign that said, "We will not be renovicted." So Billy Klein has lived in a Toronto apartment building for more than 20 years, as you said, with his son. They pay about $1,100 in rent. He has been delivered one of these so-called N13 forms by his landlord. They intend to sort of evict him to complete some major renovations. Billy is really concerned that if he is evicted, he will not be allowed back to his unit. And that is a major concern because, as you well know, Scott, it's really tough to find another apartment right now where you pay $1,100 in rent for a 2-bedroom, which is what Billy currently pays. So he's really concerned. He said to me, what am I going to do? Like, go out and buy a tent from Canadian Tire if this is what happens to me? And so he was bringing the protest to Klein's doorstep. He wanted Klein to know that he's not going anywhere, that he's going to fight his renoviction. And he said that he believes Klein has a cold heart and is only pursuing this sort of pattern of renovictions for the money.
Okay, let's get to Klein's comments. You spoke with him recently, and he denies all allegations of improper or illegal actions, yet his reputation would indicate otherwise. What did he say to you?
No, you nailed it. He denies all of these allegations and says, frankly, that advocates and tenants are slandering him. He said all of the companies he's affiliated with are, practicing their corporate behavior in a legal way that is absolutely according to provincial law. He confirmed indeed that the company that owns the property where Billy lives, that company is keen to undertake renovations. He said that they are doing so because there are renovations that are long overdue. He said that these are 50-year-old buildings that have not been properly sort of kept up to date. He said they need new kitchens, bathrooms, and floors. And, I went to this property and yes, they probably could do with an update. Advocates say, however, there are ways to do those updates that don't require sort of mass evicting tenants, that it would be possible to do them with tenants still living there. But Klein says effectively that these are required renovations. They're going to be so substantial that folks have to leave. He also said that his affiliated companies have never faced any government penalties for evictions. However, it is important to note that a recent landlord tenant board tribunal did recently deny a Klein affiliated company an N13, this capacity to evict a tenant. And so, advocates have said, these things take a while to work through the landlord tenant board. And so it will be interesting to see whether or not the LTB starts to deny more of these N13s, or whether or not indeed Klein is able to undertake these renovations as his affiliated buildings are keen to do.
And there could be some help on the way, Gabe, by way of a new renovation bylaw that's coming to Toronto in July of this year. Can you maybe touch on some of the changes with that new bylaw?
Certainly. So, Acorn was an organization that really pushed for the creation of this bylaw. It has a number of different provisions aimed to stop renovictions. I'll get to it in one moment, but just to sort of importantly say, under Ontario's laws, it does allow landlords to undertake major renovations that do sort of kick tenants out of their properties. But crucially, under the law, tenants are allowed to come back to their properties, and they are supposed to pay the same rate of rent as when they were there before. And so importantly, advocates are saying that in Klein-affiliated buildings, tenants are being sort of misled about their capacity to come back, and in some cases that they are not being allowed to come back. And so this new renoviction bylaw in Toronto is aiming to sort of give tenants a better deal when they are so-called renovicted. So this provision will require that a landlord who evicts a tenant to do a major renovation will have to provide that tenant with comparable housing at a similar rent for the duration of construction, or provide payments that make up the difference between what they're currently paying and what they must pay during the construction period. So right now, if you're a tenant, Scott, somebody evicts you temporarily to do a major renovation in your unit, you have to go and find somewhere else to live, and you might have to pay $1,000 more a month. Right now, that's on you. In Toronto, the new change will mean that effectively landlords have to cover that change in cost. And that indeed, some landlords will be probably opting to house folks in another unit in that same building that is, free and available. Those are things that advocates, I think, are really saying are going to help to protect tenants. Landlords are also going to have to provide moving allowances where tenants do have to move. So $1,500 for a studio or one bedroom, $2,500 for a 2 or more bedroom unit.
Okay, so that's July of 2025. What happens next for these tenants in the meantime? I understand that some of them intend to challenge their renovictions at the Landlord-Tenant Board.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So, Billy Thornhill and 25 odd of his other fellow tenants living on Gusville Avenue in the Mount Dennis neighborhood in Toronto, they have said that they are not keen to leave their properties, and they are going to challenge their N13 notices at the Landlord Tenant Board Tribunal. The anticipated dates for those hearings are scheduled to come up in January. And so this is absolutely a story to watch. It will be really interesting to see what happens at the LTB for these Toronto tenants, but also for tenants, across those 6 other cities across the province, what the LTB decides. So this is one to keep an eye on.
All right, Toronto Today reporter Gabe Oatley with the latest on Michael Klein on tonight's Closer Look.